Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. Happy to be talking to you today on behalf of the Midwest Writing Center about privilege in workshop. What we're mostly going to be discussing today is who has it and why does it matter? This is going to be a related lesson to one I've got planned in April. It'll be April 20th. We'll be talking about whose story is this to tell. So they're related workshops or they're related topics and videos. Just so you know, we've got that in two categories. So we're not going to cover everything today, and it's not going to be that crazy or that complicated. After I do the little talk, we'll talk about what's up and new and exciting at the Midwest Writing Center. Then we'll have our writing prompt. So a couple of things to get out of the way first. I'm going to be saying we or they a lot, and that is not to include or exclude anyone or to call myself any particular community. This is just, honestly, I started saying we about everything when I was working at a preschool, and it's a holdover that I don't mind at all. But I noticed when I was writing my notes for today that I wrote they a lot, and I thought that was interesting. Something worth reflecting on, certainly, but it didn't actually have a strong, important meaning. I'm not separating myself from the they or necessarily including myself in the we, just wanted to clarify that in advance. So first, I think the most important thing when you're having a big, important conversation, or really any where you want people to understand you, is to define your terms. When I say workshop, what do I mean? In this setting, what I mean is a group of writers who come together. This conversation is going to be specific to literature. A lot of the time I try to include other arts. Other arts have workshopping and critique groups. I'm only talking about literature today. I'm sorry, everyone else. But the reason for that, of course, is that language is so specific, and those working in writing and literature have that extra layer to grapple with that visual mediums don't. Of course, you know, songwriters and filmmakers and stuff also have to deal with language, but I don't know anything about those arts, so I don't speak to them. All right, so workshop is, in this context, a group of writers coming together to work on improving their writing. Sometimes we use the word editing, sometimes we use the word revising, sometimes we use the word critique group. These are all more or less synonyms. So that's what workshop means today. And workshop can be a noun or a verb, right? Sometimes I say workshopping, and that's the process of making those edits or working with that group. Sometimes I say workshop as a noun, and what that means is the group or setting. Now, what do I mean by privilege? That is such a heavy and hot word right now. So I thought it was important to start out with a definition of that. First, I don't think it needs to be heavily weighted. The concept of privilege is sometimes hard to interrogate and wrestle with and come to terms with. But I don't think the word needs to be a problem. I know that it does turn a lot of people off. So my hope is that by just talking about it by definition, in the barest terms, and in practical and pragmatic ways, that'll be put to rest at least a little bit, or at least for some of us. So what I mean by privilege is an advantage specific to a person or specific to a group. So the advantages that one group has over another. The end. So when we put that in the context of writing, of art, of the workshop setting, what does that mean? Who has these advantages? What are the advantages that one group may have over another? Like most things, social and economic class matter a lot, but I'm going to break that down a little further too. When I say social and economic class, what I really mean And what the biggest factors are in the literary world are going to be cultural background and education. And that's not necessarily the education of the writer themselves, but the education and cultural background of the writer's parents and family. For example, my parents are educated. And so I have a huge advantage, even though my father's parents were not educated. My father's parents were immigrants, didn't learned English here. My father and his siblings learned English in school, right? So my father had many fewer advantages, much less privilege than I do, having educated parents. So the cultural background and education of the writer and their family matters more than economic status or social status. Social status goes along with cultural status, cultural class, but economic could be anywhere. That's it's a little less important in literature. So what does that mean? Folks from non-dominant cultures are often misunderstood in workshop and in their writing, and told that their writing is like off because their audience, and we all do this. This is not really a flaw. It's a very human thing, but we assume ourselves as the audience, but also in life, to be the experts. And if the writer comes from a different background from you, you're not the expert. Granted, we are maybe part of the dominant culture, and therefore we are the dominant audience. But that doesn't mean that the writer is doing anything wrong. It just means that we don't understand it. The reason this is such a problem is because writers from non-dominant cultures, and by that I primarily mean people of color, people of non-dominant religions, meaning not Judeo-Christian background if we're in the US having this conversation, or gender and sexual minorities, differently abled. There's tons of things. I always think it's problematic to list kinds of people, because for sure you're going to leave somebody out, but also then you're like deciding what a kind of person is. Like, so physical and mental ability, skin color, race and ethnic background, immigrant status, gender and sexual identity, all these things contribute to being part of a non-dominant culture. And so coming from these backgrounds, particularly coming from a different cultural background, a writer automatically, it's probably automatic, it may not be, has to translate their work before they show it to an audience, because they know, the way that they talk naturally, or the way that they are expressing themselves in their natural place, natural state, isn't necessarily going to be easily palatable or easily accepted or easily understood by a dominant audience. And they do that in every part of life, right? In order to have a conversation, I do code switching, I change my posture, whatever. But when we're making art, we shouldn't have to do that. The art should be as the artist wishes for it to be. And so if you're having to translate your work to fit your audience, your art's not going to be as honest. So that is one way we're at a disadvantage. People lack privilege. And that's why traditional workshop methods can be problematic, because we give all the power to the reader, and then the reader is the expert in the room. Even though, we have the artist there, we can ask questions, we're not allowed to. So we're saying, I like this, or I don't get this, or this is weird, or like, because I don't get it as the audience, you need to fix it. Where it may just be a cultural reference, and maybe you could look it up. I saw an example in reading recently that was like a food item that, so I do, extra research into the literary world, right? And this example that came up was a woman who had written something and she had mentioned a food item, and her entire workshop period was taken up with people just being like, I don't know what this means, change it, rather than letting her respond, rather than having anyone look it up. It's just a food item, not the important part of the scene, etc. So it's also why, so these reasons, particularly in that traditional workshop method, where the writer doesn't get to respond, or people are seeing themselves as the expert and focusing on smaller pieces that trouble them rather than the work as a whole, or what's really working, or ways to clear up questions. That really shifts a lot of people away from literature, because they're being pushed away. They're being told that they're wrong and that people don't get them, and that their work isn't palatable, when the reality is just that they're being workshopped wrong, and people's privilege is being put up above their craft. And with having to translate, and with having like weird accidental misunderstandings, their work isn't being seen for craft. It's being seen not as art, but as something to dress down, because there's a potential misunderstanding that's cultural and not actually related to the quality of the piece. This one is one that I think may specifically be literary, or having to deal with words, right? I don't know. I'm not, I clearly love visual art, but I'm not a visual artist. I'm not immersed in that world, so I don't know how this comes across in other art forms, but I know the use of language with its specificity, and the ways in which we use it to express ourselves pushes a lot of people out of literature because of the misunderstanding between the dominant culture, the folks who have that advantage, and those who don't. And that's not a valid reason for someone to leave an art form, right? We should be obviously encouraging more people to get into it, right? We want more art, we want good art, we want different art, we want art that pushes boundaries and makes us think. And so when we workshop this way, with the expectation that my perception is the right perception, we're pushing other people out, which is doing us a disservice, right? We want more, we want better, and we're getting less and maybe worse. Education is always a huge factor in cultural privilege because of a lack of understanding or access to the dominant mode of communication. This is why privilege in this vein is a lot about your parents, or whoever raised you and their education level, because they're teaching you the codes, they're teaching you the communication methods, they're teaching you how to fit in, how to assimilate, subconsciously, right? You don't know that that's what your parents are teaching you, but they had to assimilate in such a way in order to fit in. Yeah, so my notes on this topic are not in sentences, and that's a little annoying if I'm honest. So even if one comes from a background that isn't understood by the general dominant audience, if they have access to education, or the people in their lives have education, they have more privilege, they have a greater advantage over folks who don't, right? That's how that is. So who has the advantage? This is gonna be a shorter video than I thought. I spent like really long time compiling my notes and I'm almost through them. Who has the advantage? Folks from the dominant culture. Am I dancing around saying something specific by saying dominant culture? I'm not really meaning to, because I think that that's a really wide, I think that's a wide net. There's a lot to catch in that net. Um, but it's going to be the same people who have privilege in other areas, right? Because that access is not something that's available easily to people outside the dominant culture. So a lot of this is the easy stuff, right? It's straight, cis, white, um, affluent, educated. Folks represented in the media and literary canon. Literary canon is an extra bonus here because until very recently, it was really only men. Even the turn of the 20th century, we had so few women in writing, and we still have proportionately very few women in writing. Not to mention queer and non-binary folks, right? Importantly, I've already said, people whose parents are educated, but also whose parents are born in, whatever culture. We're in the US, so people who are born in the US, but this is obviously dependent on where you are. But because the gatekeepers historically, and in this context, when I say gatekeeping, what I mean is the people in power have been, in our country, they have been straight, cis, white men with money. So those are the people who decided what was worth publishing, what was worth putting out into the world. And that would be people who come from a similar background to them, because we so often want art that validates our identity, our place in the world, that feels like it's speaking a universal truth to us. And that's reasonable. That's totally reasonable. Art exists to comfort, to challenge, to thrill, right? And so if all the people choosing what gets published and put out into the world have similar backgrounds, they're going to have similar tastes. That's just true. They may not have the same, like, maybe one likes sci-fi and one likes mystery and one likes horror, right? But what they see as, what works, what they see as easy to read, what they see as representing them is going to be all very similar stuff. Now, of course, we're in a much different world than we were 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And there are more people in those fields, people who are not straight, cis, white, or men. And that's expanding our horizons a lot. But when we get down to workshops, right, when we get down to the small communities of writers, we're still talking about a literary canon that existed before more people were in this field. And that's what we've all read. That's what we grew up reading. That's what that's who built our society. So that's what we're used to, and that's what we're calling good. There's a lot to be said about the canon. Canon, maybe a word that folks don't know. When I say canon, I mean like the classics. And a lot of them I really, really love, and I'm not ever going to discount them. But the canon needs a lot of work because it's only representative of one group. Canon generally means, in this context, the books that we deem classic, the books that we teach to our children. Okay, I think I did a lot of explaining on that, on who has that particular privilege. So what advantage do they have? They're the experts in our culture. Our whole society was built to benefit one group of people. And again, that's just the way things were. This is not a value judgment on people who are existing today, doing life today. But they have an advantage because the world was built for them. That's just true. And that's not nobody hanging out today is the person who created society. But they have a huge advantage for that reason. all the media up until, now was made for them. They're the test audiences, they're the juries, they're the artists and creators, they're the people spending the money. So of course it was all made for them, which gives them a huge advantage. They get to be an expert by virtue of identity. They're represented and they're spoken to and spoken for. That's an advantage. They also don't have to translate their writing in order for it to be understood or edit their identity to fit their audience. And that's the big thing, because we're not talking about, making blockbuster movies. We're talking about existing in our own workshop groups. And due to society being built for one group, folks from this group have an advantage in that they don't have to do any extra work for their writing to be considered art or palatable, or for people to understand all of it, where folks from other groups do. That's the big thing. By having general privilege, having general advantages in how you go through life, benefits you in the small levels too. And it's great. But we should all have that advantage, right? Why does it matter who has extra advantages or what the advantages are? The first thing is my favorite pet peeve, gatekeeping. Now, in this context, when I say gatekeeping, I mean we're locking the gate and keeping people out. That's the worst thing we can do for art, just period. If I had it my way, all humans would be making art, because that's how we express ourselves. That's how we go through life. It's we want to let more people in the door. We want to see more people's art. We want to live in a world of art, right? The more art there is, the more accessible art is. And here, when I say accessible, I mean accessible to create. But it should be accessible to consume, just, not always. I don't want to say art that's hard to understand is not art or not good or not worthy, because it is. But what I'm saying currently is we want art to be something all people can make. So we don't want to lock that gate. We want to let more people in. And there's an education to be had from joining a workshop group, any workshop group. And there are benefits to engaging in works in progress. And that shouldn't be something that only a small group of people have, because they are not having to work harder at doing this labor to be understood, when the piece of art on its own should be able to stand and not be criticized for something that is small or is cultural or is in a vernacular the audience isn't familiar with. Everybody read I forgot the book I was going to reference. Plenty of folks read Clockwork Orange or Trainspotting, right? And this is, I don't know anybody who talks like that. And yet, we were able to get through it. So that can be true for the folks in our own workshop group. And it's not about slogging through, but if it is a little extra work for you to read, you're going to benefit from that too. That helps us all grow. When we're not opening up, right? When we're not accepting folks who have less of an advantage in the workshop setting. And I'm hugely privileged in workshop, right? I've done a lot of workshopping. I know a lot of styles. I don't write in a way that's hard to understand to the dominant culture. So this is also on me. I need to be doing this opening. But when we are not welcoming to folks outside the dominant culture, when we keep it just to ourselves, those of us who have this privilege of knowing how to go about a workshop, we're not welcoming other styles and voices. We're not seeing what else is out there in the arts. And our art isn't going to grow if we're not experiencing that. And that's true. That's why writers so often tell you to read widely. That's why, we say that we want to read many genres. That's why we want to read people from different backgrounds. Um, if we're not exploring and working together in the trenches of art with people different from ourselves, um, we're not growing as people or as artists. Um, which is to say, of course, we're basically fostering a monoculture, which is sort of funny that I'm always talking about gardening. I don't know how to garden. But it's true. We don't, we're only going to produce the same stuff if we only interact with the same stuff. And that's boring. It is. So how do we fix it? That's a huge, huge question. I want to just be like, by being nice to each other, but that's really a Sarah-ism and not a real world thing. So when we're in workshop and we find something that's like a little prickly and we look up and that prickles us, that feels difficult to us, and we look up and we realize, oh, this person is different from me. For whatever reason, we're aware, though, we know we've met this person in workshop and we're aware that this person comes from a different background. And so now we're a little concerned that when we say, oh, I don't like this, or this doesn't work for me, we don't want to be racist or classist or whatever kind of accidental prejudice we have, right? We don't want to be rude. So what do we do when we want to offer feedback and we're scared that our feedback is insensitive or ignorant, naive, or we just don't want to look bad? Asking questions rather than making statements is helpful. I was talking to a friend who she and I do a lot of writing together, or discussing of writing together, and she said that she really wanted to try out doing questions, and it's not easy. It's something that I'm a huge proponent of, and I really, really think that we need to ask more questions when we're workshopping each other, but it's not easy to do. So my advice there is like take notes and see how you can wrap a question word into your sentence. And in the vein of taking notes, we also want to do a little thinking about the judgment we're making, rather than offering out loud a value judgment. When I say value judgment, I mean saying things like good, bad, like, dislike, and just putting it is not a lot of effort. It is some effort, but it's not much to just reshape the language we use when we offer feedback. And maybe you have a friend or a workshop group and you can all do it together and just practice. When you're in workshop, just be like, okay, guys, today we're not going to use good, bad, like, dislike. And that's going to be hard for everybody, but at least you're doing it together. Yeah, I know a lot of times I'm really tempted to say things like, I love what you did with blank because it had this effect. All you would have to do then is just say, doing blank had this effect. And if you want to go further, if you want to go further with it, you can say, this effect works to do X. Saying works doesn't work is also a value judgment, so be careful with that. I'm not, I didn't bring any work to share today with you, to say, here's a specific line that we can critique together and work on, but maybe I should do that. Actually, that's an excellent idea. Writing critique live. It'll be really scary and fun, I think. Another thing you can do to fix this accidental gatekeeping, and sort of remedy who has the advantage in group, is using different workshop styles. Eventually, I will do a whole thing on the various workshop styles. I talk about different workshop styles pretty often, but I have never been, compiled a list and given examples, which I'll do in that critique live. This is so great. look at how generative this video is today. um, and the hardest thing that we do, and maybe the scariest thing that we do, is to offer our group, our workshop group, or our skills in workshop to a wider group of people. And there are practical reasons that this is difficult. We only know the people we know, right? So you can say, everybody invite a friend, or you can advertise. But that's, maybe a bigger problem anyway. If we just don't know a wide enough group of people, that's kind of a bummer, and not not something I can solve. But you can reach out even just on social media or to your friends and say, hey, I've noticed that there's a bit of a monoculture in my workshop group or in my friend group. Does anyone, know anyone who might want to join? Or does anyone, know what I'm doing that is maybe scaring people away? That's the really hard part. My advice in general is just be as open as possible and never use value judgments. Offering access to wider groups is something that's really easy to say that we're doing, and then we can often learn on accident, obviously, that we're not as welcoming as we think we are. But all of the things that I've said about how to change your critique style will make your group more welcoming. So that's hopeful and useful. And it's scary and it's hard, especially when we don't totally realize how much privilege, how much advantage we have over other people. Because until recently, I think we didn't have a reason to investigate that. We just go through life, and everyone's life is hard, and we don't really have a reason to wonder how easy our life is next to other people, because we don't live their lives, we don't live in their shoes. And even if we are doing a thought experiment or an empathy exercise, it takes a lot to be able to do that. So the tips here today, I'm getting very serious now. The tips here today are about how to make your group more welcoming, how to recognize what advantages you have, or what advantages you don't have, and see how, my dad's calling, and see how, you fit or don't fit in your workshop group, or maybe why you don't fit in your workshop group, and how to change it. It's all hard. But the whole point is to be welcoming, to acknowledge what advantages we have, and to extend those advantages to others. A lot of the time, just doing a quick use your favorite search engine and look up a term if it's not familiar to you. A lot of the times that'll solve the problem. And since everything's online these days, you can do that real covertly. Just, oh, hey, I understand now. But mostly, play with the language you use when you give feedback, and listen first. Got so heavy here at the end. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I think this is a really important topic. I'll probably talk about it a lot more. And there's a lot that goes into it. And, specific to writers, specific to workshopping, there at least exist ways to be more welcoming to a wider group of people. And that's the least we can do. If you're taking off now, I hope that you go forth and write more light into your life. If you are hanging out, let's talk about what's up in the Midwest Writing Center. Okay. I have my calendar with me today. It's going to be much more swift and smooth this time. On Thursday, I'm super excited to welcome a comic artist and general like Renaissance man of the arts who he is a filmmaker and he is a musician and he's a graphic designer. But I'm most excited to talk about comics and comics as a literary form, comics as literature with Elk, and I believe his last name is Paw. I I don't know him. I've never met him, but he's like well known in some circles, and I'm very excited and nervous about it. So we're going to talk about comics as literature, and this is something that's really important to me as a lover of literature, and also as someone who has a hard time reading comics. It's going to be really cool because I will always be on the side of calling it literature if it uses words. And we're going to really delve into why that matters and why making literature more accessible is what comics do. I mean, I don't know much about comics. I go through phases where I just cannot look at the pictures, which takes some of the story out. But, you know, I worked at a bookstore and I know a lot of librarians who talk about like parents who don't want their kids to read comics because they're not real books. And that's garbage, just so you know. No judgment on you. I'm asking you to stop judging the comics. I'm really excited about that. And like I said, Elk is well known and very intelligent, and it's going to be great. This week, MWC has a partnership with Dead Poets Espresso. It's a coffee shop in Moline. We're accepting for them submissions of poetry, which they will put on display at the coffee shop during the month of April, which is National Poetry Month. So send in your poems to midwestwritingcenter@gmail.com. 21 lines or fewer in the poems, and there's a handful of more rules, not a ton, like include a bio. That's available on our website, mwcqc.org. And then you may win. You may be on display. It is a contest, but you know they're going to choose many people because you know they're going to put a poem on each table and they get a lot of really great stuff. Switch it out. I say all the time I'm not really a poet, but I might submit. Just like what a cool thing. I want to be on display at a coffee shop for my writing. April is National Poetry Month. I know, I'm like, I have my calendar here. April is blank. April is National Poetry Month. So we're going to have our National Poetry Month reading. I cannot announce the details yet, but it is going to be excellent. We have our Young Emerging Writers internship applications are open. We're taking your applications. If you know a writer, an artist between the ages of 15 and 19, or if you are one, all that information too is on our website. There's a couple posts on our social media about it. But it's a paid internship for young writers. I was in it as a kid and I am still a writer today, really loving it. It's really excellent. It's paid, like I said. We teach critiquing, we teach literature, and we build and create a whole literary magazine in just 6 weeks. It's really excellent. Educationally, for your resume, and socially, it's a great way to meet other artists. As always, on the first and third Saturday of the month from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time, we have our workshop group, Writers Studio. That's on Zoom, and the link is out there on our page in our newsletter. So we'll advertise that as it comes up. That's going to be next week. We also have Quint City Poets, which MWC is now assisting with hosting, which is the first Wednesday of every month in the evening. And MWC is also now helping to host the Flash Fatale group, which is a all-femme writing group, critique group for short work. flash is usually used in the context of fiction, but as I understand it, it's just really short work. And I think that it's just because it is alliterated and it sounds better that way. Yeah, the writers conference is coming up, but details are not yet released on that. But I am out of my mind excited about it. It's going to be so fantastic. Truly, when we got confirmation for a couple of the faculty, I legitimately screamed. So very cool. Now, like always, we're going to have our pre-write here. If you're taking off, like I've already said, write more light into your life. If you're going to hang out with me, today's prompt is going to be on privilege. So we already talked about how the word is pretty heavy, a little bit controversial. I'm setting my timer now. So, you know, maybe journal on it, maybe write a poem about it, maybe write about a workshop group that is, hi Kitty, you know, that is inclusive or not inclusive. You know, maybe run away with it. Maybe write a little fantasy piece about, it doesn't have to be a little, about, you know, a totally different world and the privileges and advantages and disadvantages in that world. Hi, baby. Yeah, setting that timer now for 5 minutes and I will write with you. If the cat moves. funny. We had that workshop on journaling for mental health recently, and I am a big lover of journaling as a medium, as a thing that people should do. And I don't do it that often. And often, of course, I say this all the time. I usually end up journaling when I do the free writes here with you. Um, and I think that's interesting because it feels like such a weight off my chest every time I do it. We've got less than a minute, by the way. 30 seconds. Is it gonna make me jump? Probably. Hi, sweetie. Everything's fine. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Let me know your thoughts on privilege and workshop or throughout the arts. I would love to hear about it. I know academia is rife with questions about privilege in the arts, and I would love more perspectives. I would love to have more solutions. So let me know. Also, don't forget to check us out on YouTube, trying to get those subscribers up. And as always, write more light into your life.